House, and we are always very happy to partner with 1455 Menards to do some programming here. I've been here for less than a year, so please feel free to ask me whatever you'd like, and I will hopefully know the answer. But how many of you have been to the Potter's House before? It's okay if you haven't, I'm just curious. So a couple of you, almost. So I'm going to try to give you my quick spiel. The Potter's House was opened in 1960 by the founders of the Church of the Savior. But with the idea being that this was not, well, that it was to be a secular space, right? This was a community space, a gathering space, a place to have challenging conversations or connect with your neighbor. And we've always served food and had books. The books started out with more of a spiritual religious bent rather than this collection you see here today. But many, many years later, we are still a cafe, a bookstore, and very much consider ourselves a place for gathering. If you had any time to browse, you will notice we are not a general bookstore. We have a lot that focuses on social justice. We do a lot with, I'm trying to think of a better term to say, I'm going to say underrepresented voices, right? It's not solely that, but it's very heavily a part of our collection. We give out free meals every day between 8:30 and 11. So if you saw the little $8 donation when you stepped up to the register, that's what that is. Last year we gave out over 22,000 meals. So while most folks come in and they see the bookstore and the cafe, and we love that, we actually do a lot of community work and consider ourselves very much rooted in the community and a support for this community, in addition to serving great coffee and food from scratch. That's something I'm very proud of. You know, a couple of the pastries are not from scratch, but most of them are. And all of the food, well, I mean, we're really not making croissants in our tiny kitchen, if you couldn't guess that. But yeah, but it's something I think is really nice these days to be able to say your food is from scratch. So thank you for coming today. I'm going to turn it over. I'm very excited that David and Sean are here for this conversation, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'll just add, so needless to say, it's a tremendous honor to partner with Potter's House. I thank the team, I thank the mission. It's really our honor, and it really is meaningful. It's still, and some of the poems talk about this, thinking about 3 years ago where we were, we're I think still gradually emerging, but to be able to gather in person, the right place makes it that much more meaningful. So it's great to be here. Thank you all for coming out. Two quick things. First of all, I'm going to apologize right up front for the elephant in the room or on my face. I'd like to say I do fight for poetry all the time. This is not the result of a bar brawl. I had a procedure this week, everything is fine, but the show must go on. So while I prefer to be normal, I've got some marks on my face. So that being said, I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the executive director of 1455. We are a literary nonprofit that celebrates storytelling. And all of our programming that we do throughout the year is free. We have an annual festival. We've got an author series like what we're doing today. We have a bi-monthly magazine that we put out. You can find out more about that on the internet today. I want to focus entirely on the author. So with gratitude to everyone for being here, let me introduce our special guest featured author, who I'm sure some of you, or if not all of you, know. David Ebenbach is the author of 9 books of fiction, poetry, and nonfiction. And his work has picked up awards along the way, including the Drew Hines Literature Prize, the Juniper Prize, the Patricia Bibby Award, and more. Born and raised in the great city of Philadelphia, these days David does most of his writing right here in Washington, D.C., where he lives with his family and works at Georgetown University, promoting inclusive, student-centered teaching at the Center for New Designs in Learning and Scholarship, and teaching creative writing and literature at the Center for Jewish Civilization and Creativity through the Masters in Learning, Design, and Tech program. David, it's a real honor to, we've known each other like everyone does these days through social media, but I believe this is our first time in conversation. So on behalf of 1455, thank you for being part of this program. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Sean is a huge champion of literature and authors in general. I'm really grateful for all the things you do for all sorts of writers. I'm grateful additionally that you solicited poems of mine to be in the magazine Movable Type that you talked about, which got some of these poems out in front of people. I'm grateful for you suggesting this conversation, showing up even under duress. So thank you, and thanks, to Andrea and Potter's House, a great institution, and I'm very honored to be here. And then thanks, for this kind of gray, cloudy day for folks coming out. Just in general, just lots of thanks.
Okay, so I've got a couple of quick questions, and then we're gonna have the author read from this amazing collection. But let's kick things off. I want to endorse one of the blurbs on the back cover from Matthew Olsman, where he writes, quote, "Behind the world's tough machinery is an undeniable beauty." And this tension, this push and pull of stopping to smell the proverbial roses, while also lamenting how briefly they color our world, seems to be a through line in this work. For me, that's an opening salvo. Would you like to introduce the collection and what you think some of the themes are, and where you were at while you were writing it, and where you are when you think about it now?
Yeah, well, as a poet, and my good poet partner, Jamie Cooperman, who's here, knows this better than anybody, I tend to be a bit all over the place. I write on just about anything and everything, and then every once in a while I think, boy, I have a really big pile of poems, maybe there's a book in here somewhere, and usually some of the poems I've been writing don't fit, and then they stay in the pile, and then later on the pile gets bigger again. So there's a book back there, Some Unimaginable Animal, that pulls together my obsession with kind of the physical facts of living, the body, hunger, physical struggles. And those all came together, but they left some that are actually in this book. And then I added to that pile. Basically, this book, I think, is about how the world to me is sort of bafflingly, simultaneously, really broken. I mean, badly broken, and absolutely gorgeous. And how to hold all of that at the same time, or in alternating moments. How do you deal with the fact that the world isn't just this one thing, but it's extremely two things, or probably lots more than two, but those two are on my mind. So this book tries to see if you can hold those things at the same time.
I mean, so yes, and that, I think poetry, as much as any art form, really lives in that tension of observing and wanting to find words to describe the pain and the beauty, but goes deeper and interrogates, what we're thinking about while we're experiencing it. I think that's as good an intro as any. I certainly would love if you'd be kind enough to read us some poems from the collection, and then, as I promised, throughout the Q&A, I have a few I'm going to ask you to read if you don't get to them first. And also, I should have said right up front, I want to bake in time for Q&A for everyone that came here today. And also, these are very informal. If you've got a question along the way, please raise your hand. I'm not going to wait till the end to acknowledge. We can keep the conversation flowing as it needs to.
Totally. Thanks. Well, I always like to start with a poem by someone who is not me. So, because you're going to hear from me for a little bit. So our current poet laureate, Ada Limon, is someone who I love. And her poem, Instructions on Not Giving Up, is one of my very favorites of hers, so I thought I would start with that. Ada Limon's Instructions on Not Giving Up. More than the fuchsia funnels breaking out of the crabapple tree, more than the neighbor's almost obscene display of cherry limbs shoving their cotton candy-colored blossoms to the slate sky of spring rains, it's the greening of the trees that really gets to me. When all the shock of white and taffy, the world's baubles and trinkets leave the pavement strewn with the confetti of aftermath, the leaves come. Patient, plodding, a green skin growing over whatever winter did to us, a return to the strange idea of continuous living despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty. Fine then, I'll take it, the tree seems to say, a new slick leaf unfurling like a fist to an open palm. I'll take it all. So now I have the unenviable task of following Ada Limon. Whose idea was that? But I actually want to start by reading a pair of sentences from my acknowledgments page. I'm just going to real quickly throw this one out there. It's about writing poems and then working on them. Of course, those first drafts needed a lot of revision, and I am particularly grateful to Jamie Cooperman for her crucial feedback and wisdom along the way. If you haven't already read it, go grab her book, You Look Nice, Strange Man. It's phenomenal. And thanks, James. So, like I said, the book is sort of about beauty and brokenness, and so you'll hear those things to different degrees here. This one is called Spring Anti-Meridian. Oh, and I'm way more into cherry blossoms than Ada Limon, actually. I think they're amazing. Leaves are good too, but Spring Anti-Meridian. Here, the limbs of the trees are all opening. The unclenching of many little green hands, white, while light takes a sharp line on the first moments of the day. Now, the petals of the early magnolia flowers are already falling. Funny thing is, I actually wrote that before I read her opening hands in her poem. I guess we're all just kind of breathing the same air. This poem is called Y Men, and it's like X-Men, but Y instead of X. A little bit in honor of Caitlin because it's got kind of a sci-fi vibe. Here at Professor Y's Academy for Alienated Children, we admit students not on the basis of ability, but the depth of their disaffection. They don't have abilities, can't fly or turn air into ice or light into a weapon, can't heal from wounds faster than anyone else. In fact, they're worse at that. But they can fill empty spaces without ever touching. Our school, meanwhile, has no front at all. Here is one of the back lawns of our academy where pupils sit in the unmowed grass and contemplate grievances. Most have allergic reactions. You'll see that the tennis court is empty, the pool drained. Some of our students climb down into the dry blue hollow and ask each other unanswerable questions that nobody answers. Can you hear the reverberation? We call that the sound of not knowing. And this is the cafeteria where people poke at a wide range of foods from across the globe and stare over one another's shoulders. We fill the rooms with shadow. Classes run from sunup to sundown and focus on futility, on repetition and futility. There are tests that don't end. And then after dinner, pupils retreat to rooms, each one a single, each one fitted with extra walls. Sometimes we have dances where students form a natural ring of stillness. And this one is called Plague City, and this is one of the ones that was in the little title, yeah? Yeah, I kept a list, but it won't separate from Ada Limon, which I understand. I wouldn't either. Yeah, Plague City, Picking, Saturday Morning, and Falling are all from there. So, Plague City, which is one of the newer poems in the book, you're going to be able to see that. And I write lots of poems that are something city, or city of something. Plague City. From the window, sometimes I see a person walking a dog. The dogs have to walk no matter who's sick. They are energy compressed. Sunlight leans on them and their nervous owners. After 2 long weeks, I go out because I need to go out to the cherry trees. There are a few people and dogs out here, and I duck them all around cars and signposts winding up the hill. 2 blocks of sunlight. Then the cherries, clouds, fields of cotton, a reversal of something, a surrounding, which is to say that they have bloomed heedlessly, wantonly, with determination. They spray the air white, pink. It's almost like they don't need us. This is another one that was in Movable Type 1455's magazine. Sean was kind enough to include this. And maybe after this I should pause and save the rest, or what do you think?
Your call.
So much responsibility. Okay. This one is called Picking. We pay to pick apples and raspberries. We ask the tour guides at Alcatraz to lock us in. Put our heads and hands in the stocks. Walk through slave quarters with heads ducked. Cross the hushing sand of the old island synagogue. We raise our kids in a wax museum of tragedy, where they fake their deaths 1,000 times. Schindler's List is on, but it'll push dinner back. We watch it in pieces. In the sun, we stand up and rest a few minutes. Who chose this outing? Tomorrow is the reenactment of Manassas. All I have is this blue coat, my grandfather's Coast Guard, because he stayed home with bad eyes. It still has some of the original buttons. In this museum, I carry the passport of someone who died. Our children ask for pie. I actually think I better keep going because that's pretty tough. Yeah. I'll just read these last three poems and then we'll go forward. First day of spring. There is a beauty that engulfs, that replaces the morning. No sun on the sidewalk, no air to breathe, and the early mist held in place as if by hands. But not mine, not me, gone. Not my slow morning thoughts, gone with the row homes, and me down to the footprint, gone, barely holding on to even the words, cherry blossom, cherry blossom, cherry blossom. Yeah, and I'll just read these last two. This one is a short, very short one called Saturday Morning. Despite everything, sun finds the synagogue window. Despite everything, stretches into the sanctuary, whitening the white walls, polishing the wood floors, touching shoulders and hair with warm hands. Finds us gathered from our many daily exiles, already singing. And then finally, I'm going to read a poem called Falling, and it illustrates a thing that I like to do a lot. Sometimes I want to write something, but I don't know how, so I write a poem about how I'm going to write that thing. It's a great shortcut if you're looking for one. Falling. I'm going to write a poem about joy, that thing some poets know about. And the poem will come out in long lines, maybe even a single sentence, so that everyone, the poet and the reader, will be rushing, tumbling almost toward the finish, breath drawing down the throat, and the lines will break into lists of the things that bring pleasure, the scent of leaves at the window, kind of blue, the perfect smoothness of peanut butter in a new jar, a rectangle of light on the bed, the car starting midwinter, untangled fur to the touch. And the reader will collect these things like marbles, like hundreds of marbles in their arms, and partly the joy will come from losing these joys. Being unable to hold them, picture marbles overflowing from your arms, falling to the floor, which is now carpeted, so that their landing is more like the oomph of sudden pleasure deep in the chest. And all around your feet is color, round and bright, and you hesitate to take a single step lest you slip on some of this happiness, fall too heavily among the things you always wanted.
Well, thank you, David, for sharing those. And I just have to say, I'm so filled with gratitude. There's just nothing that can approximate hearing poetry read by the poet. So it's just always a special opportunity to have that experience. And I'll also point out happily that one of the poems I had set aside to have you read was Saturday Morning. So why don't we start there? What I was going to ask you, and now I will ask you, is as preparing for events like this, I think it's maybe my own kind of OCD, but there's this compulsion to just thematically try to find the one poem or the one line that can represent the whole. And of course, knowing that there's no right answer, I think is liberating because you don't have the pressure, but there's still this compulsion to find. And for me, Saturday Morning touches on a lot of the through lines of this observation and this combination of celebration and lament. Do you concur that Saturday Morning could represent, or maybe just talk a little bit about that poem and why you chose to read that?
This is why we get along, because that absolutely is my favorite poem in the collection, and for me it does really stand in for the collection as a whole in a way. In a sort of general way, the sort of despite everything, the sort of the things that hang over us and the sunlight, and also the specifically Jewish aspects of that. There are actually some poems that didn't make it into this collection, but there are some that speak to this a little bit about, I mean, it's a tough time for lots of people, so I don't make any claims on any singularity, but it's certainly been a tough time to be Jewish for, 3,000 years, but certainly in the last, few years it's been challenging. And Saturdays themselves are complicated. I turn off all my notifications on Saturday. I just sort of am in the Shabbat, which is the Sabbath, and I sort of just, I love that day. And there's all this news accumulating outside of that space, some of which is like they took hostages in a synagogue, and you come out and you're like, oh, that's what's going on in that synagogue. So there's this feeling of like, we only have this space, and when we come back out, it's not always a good place to be. And yet, this is this world we live in. I was in shul one day, synagogue one day, and the sun just came in this way that was just authoritative, And I just felt the warmth of that and the love of that, and that's true. And the other stuff is true, and it's all true. And so for me, that poem is trying to nod at how many things that are not that compatible with each other are simultaneously true.
Yeah. And so I feel, and I wrote this on my notes, there's no non-pretentious way to say this, but one of the many things I really admire about this collection, David, is the way it ably represents the form of poetry, which is to say, I think there's something unique about poetry in general and poets in particular, where there's the power and the necessity of observation, but almost the inevitable, invariable next step of noticing the opposite or commenting, like if you're happy, but there's always sadness. And I think it's not unique territory to poets, certainly, but I think poets are particularly sensitive to these contradictions. That poem, I think, succinctly distills that, but I think throughout this work, there's this almost resignation and a fight between savoring what saves us in the beauty, but recognizing and acknowledging the pain.
Yeah, and the poets, I think you're right that this in general is a thing that poets do well, but a few poets that I admire that seem to zoom in on that, I'm thinking of Ross Gay, who's like one of the most joyful of all the poets, but who is really aware of the complicated nature of that. Jane Kenyon, who I think sometimes has a hard time pulling out of her own depression, her real depression, but she then, the ice cracks on the pond outside of her house, in that poem Ice Out, and it's this beautiful thing, it's spring emerging. I think Maggie Smith does a wonderful job of it. So I like to be in that space, because otherwise, a half-truth is kind of a lie in a way. I don't want to speak too strongly, but if you just pretend that some of the things are not happening, and I think you can do that either way. You can be like, it's all flowers, and that's a lie. But it's also a lie that it's all bloodshed, So it's hard to hold all of it, but I think that's kind of our job.
Beautifully said. So of course, I read this collection when it came out, and of course, I revisited it happily in preparation for this conversation. And I guess inevitably thinking about 3 years ago, right? And just seeing some of the news, whether they're memories on Facebook or just people are acknowledging, it was about 3 years ago when shit got real, when everyone was acknowledging this pandemic thing is happening. Again, I want to acknowledge and celebrate what you there are several poems in here that speak specifically about that time, which gives them the sense of being period pieces. Of course, doing what we just talked about, on a good note, we've come so far, and on a much more somber note, reading these poems and thinking about 3 years ago, much of this angst, much of this concern is still very much with us. So these poems have a staying power beyond their utility, but speak a little bit about, again, I think we're going in circles, but in a positive way, speaking about what you're doing here, is this acknowledgement of pain happens, it passes, we find the beauty, we turn to love, but depending on how you look at it, it is a ceaseless series of waves hitting the shore, or those are momentary blips in the beauty of existence. But I think that is, again, the through line of all of these poems, whether you're talking about nature, talking about the pandemic, talking about the election, the 2020 election. How do you feel looking at these 3 years later, and where we are, where we were, where we're going?
Well, one of the funniest things is how slippery the time is in it. So the poem I read, Plague City, I mean, that was early in the pandemic, and that was me escaping from my apartment to go look at cherry blossoms when nobody was going anywhere. Right before that, there's a poem called Contagion that I wrote a number of years before that about my mother and her, end of life. But they sit next to each other as though they were written in the same moment, in a way. And the poems about the election, I have the week before the election, and that's before the 2020. The night, or election night and election day, those read like it's the same election. They were actually the election where Obama was hoping to fend Romney off and luckily did. And then there's another one that's November, Shabbat morning, I think, which is 2020 again. But they read as though, and there's City of Sides, which also there's a kid who dresses up as the president, and it's based on a true story. Glover Park, where I live, is really great for Halloween. It's like a very, live bands, really, really fun. But I saw this kid who was dressed up as the president, and I'll just leave it like that for a minute. And some houses he went to, they were like, oh, we're gonna give you extra candy. I mean, I happened to see him go to 2 doors because I was watching my own kid go to those doors. And the other house was like, oh, I don't know if we should give you any candy. I'm like, it's a child. This is a child, And he was dressed as Obama. That's who was president at that time. And I mean, even I would have probably been like, here's a little extra. So the weirdness of that, but that looks also like I'm writing it during the Trump era, because some of these things don't, in a way, they don't change. So they could be kind of any election, I think it turns out, or any president. And then he trailed off awkwardly. I'm not sure how to finish that.
Well, I think it speaks to the timelessness of the concerns you've chosen, but also is a strong indication that these poems are going to live well, both on and off the page. Lest we inevitably fall down the rabbit hole of politics, I do want to, I will make a declaration. David is the DC Poet Laureate of the Cherry Blossom. You love some blooming flowers, and what better part of the world to be that guy. Talk a little bit about, and go as deeper as there's nature suffusing these poems, but in particular, a real celebration of the fleet but powerful glory of colors and rebirth that we get right here in DC.
Thank you for that. That's like the coolest thing anyone's said in a long time. Well, first of all, so I grew up in West Philadelphia, which is a neighborhood that's very, very urban, and was much more there were fewer trees when I was there, and they were super skinny. And so when I think of nature, I don't really think of the deep woods or something. I think about trees in a neighborhood. And that's what I find the most beautiful, actually, is nature in the context of kind of human stuff. I don't know why, it's appealing to me. And I think for a long time, because I grew up in a neighborhood where there wasn't that much of that, although Clark Park was nice, I mean, kind of scrubby, but nice. Because I grew up in that kind of situation, my wife thinks it's hilarious how obsessed I am with all of this nature that blooms. Because I was always the guy, there was one time we were driving through, I mean, it must have been one of those beautiful parts of the universe, like in the Berkshires or something. And she was like, "What a beautiful road." And I was like, "Yeah, it feels like they've just paved it." Because I think they had just paved the road, and I was driving, and I was like, "This is really..." So she stayed married to me, and touch and go, I think, for a while. But so for me, it's like it has to have, you know, some cars and buildings and stuff to be, and the fact that you can walk around in my neighborhood and see these insane trees that just become like a photo negative. Instead of just a bunch of green up here, it's a bunch of like light color, pink or white. It feels like the opposite of how things are supposed to be. I wandered my first few years in DC. I just wandered around, not knowing how this was possible, not understanding even what was so compelling to me, and how the universe could do it. And so I write a lot of my stuff out of a lack of understanding and out of confusion. And that goes for things that are broken, that like, how is this not fixed? How are we having this? There's a bunch of poems about gun violence in this book. Like, how have we not worked that out? You know, but at the same time also like DC is ridiculous. It's like the magnolias, and then you've got your cherry blossoms, and then you've got your red buds, and dogwoods, and one thing after the next, and then the bushes start putting stuff out, azaleas, and then there's coming out of the ground. I have a poem about where it seems like the sidewalk is going to start having flowers soon. It just feels like this city just won't quit. And it's like deep summer, and you're like, it's too hot for anything to happen, and the tree's like, I don't know. I don't know even what those flowers are, but we have one behind our building, and it's just like yellow flowers. So, yeah, I'm obsessed with things that are hard to understand. And I don't understand. I feel good because Basho also, I think, didn't totally understand cherry blossoms. He kept writing about them. So I feel like I'm in decent company.
You totally are, and I think I have a feeling that we're amongst poets and lovers of poetry, but I think one misnomer that does a disservice to the form is this notion that poets are, you know, philosophers and wise with all the answers. In some cases, they very much are, but I think a lot of art springs out of trying to make sense of the world. The question is foremost on the writer's mind, and you puzzle through that, and that's where we find the universality and the commonality.
Completely agree.
I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity, first of all, to kind of high five as someone that also dabbles in different forms. I would love to get your thoughts, and also just full stop acknowledge anyone that publishes fiction, poetry, you know, that is able to do that is worthy of recognition. So I want to just high five, like, congratulations, but also talk a bit about, I mean, all of it, but I think one thing I want to disabuse maybe the prevailing notion that if someone does dabble or is expert in multiple forms, they're not going deeply enough into one, or they're not sufficiently obsessed with the craft. I personally don't believe that, but I think your success illustrates that that's very much a misnomer. But talk a little bit, if you'd like to, about not only the difference in the forms and what pulls you to each, but where your head is at when you're maybe thinking novelistically versus thinking poetically. Complicate that for us, or uncomplicate it.
Yeah, I'll try. I should say, by the way, for the sake of Potter's House, that there are books back there, some of which are fiction, some are poetry by me, that you're welcome to acquire. It's good to get 3 or 4 copies so you can read it multiple times without, you know, the new book smell. Keep the new book smell. Okay, that's enough. So yeah, I write in multiple forms because certain material doesn't want to be in form X. You know, I've had a situation where I write a story and it's not working. And then I say, well, what if I think about how this could become a poem? And then it starts working. You know, because, and what does that mean? It means I'm less concerned about character, I'm less concerned about this event happens and then this event happens and then this event happens. And I'm more focused on the moment. And all of a sudden now it works as a poem. Are there sharp lines where you can absolutely tell a poem from a story? Totally not. Totally not. I used to teach a class on those distinctions, and we would read prose poems and short stories, which are like the same size and they look the same. And there was this anthology we read, one of each, and you'd have the same authors in both. And you're like, well, you just got this one published in there because you like submitted it, and then you submitted this one to that anthology. You know, like you haven't changed as a writer. So there's no sharp line. But for me, it's about a relative matter of emphasis. Character and plot versus like imagery and language. And for me, poems and stories, you can distinguish them a little bit in that way, but they're closer together than the novel is to either one. I think I understand the novel the least. And I think I enjoy the novel the least. There are many novels that I do love and enjoy, but there are many where I'm like, oh, come on. Are you still talking about this? You've done it. Do something else now. You know, this is padding. Whereas I feel like the short story writer and the poet, they've got to be like, just get the things you need and nothing else, and get out. And I love that. And there's a philosophical difference too, I think. A while ago I was thinking about, because there was a point where I wrote 7 novels that did not get published, that were terrible and shouldn't be published. But that's like my backstory, is like these 7 novels. And so I decided, I'm not a novel writer. By that point I'd had, I think, 2 short story collections published. And I was like, so that's who I am. I'm a short story guy and a poetry guy. And so I wrote this thing about that. By the way, the next story I tried to write was called Miss Portland. It became that novel that's back there. So you never know anything about yourself as a writer. But the idea was that I think to be writing a novel, you have to believe that you need to accumulate a lot of stuff to really have the key moment be fully meaningful. You get to the end of the thing, and it's like, you know, is this ghost going to be evicted from this house in Beloved or something? And for that to really resonate, you need everything that comes before that, right? And I think that's true, but I think you can have another philosophy at another time. And the other philosophy that you have when you're writing a short story is, if you look closely enough at any moment, you can understand everything. And sometimes I feel that way, and I write a short story or a poem, depending on whether I'm more focused on plot, character, or imagery language. And if I'm feeling like, oh, I don't know, there's a lot to get into here, I have to, you know, then it starts to become a novel. But Miss Portland was a turning point for me, because I decided when it started getting long that I wasn't going to stretch it, I wasn't going to shrink it, it was just going to be however long it needed to be, which at the time I said, this is probably going to become a novella, which is the form that is the least favorite of every human on earth. You can't get them published. People are almost angry at you if you do them, which I feel like I don't totally understand, but it's a thing. But it ended up being novel length, and I was like, oh, thank God. But at that point, I just committed to everything is going to be what it needs to be. I'm not going to push on anything. I'm not going to try to make it be something else. It's just me finding out what it is. And anytime I start getting pushy in there, it doesn't work.
You can tell this guy's a teacher, right? Because there's so much wisdom and accumulated knowledge just in that answer. I certainly am savoring that insight and concur with it. I'm curious if you have any thoughts, and this might just be top of brain because I've been reading. I feel like maybe another poet obsessive kind of, once you start noticing something, you notice everything is coloring that. But I feel like I've read lately more people maybe in the social media sphere both talking about, discussing, if not kind of confessing, that they either don't have time or don't make time to read novels, much less write them. I know novelists are committed and they're in, you know, you're in the deep end and you've got to swim your way out of that. But speaking just for myself, to tee it up to you, I do wonder sometimes about the whole environmental factor in a world where there's information overload as the default setting, attention spans, even in the best circumstances, I think most of us would acknowledge, is at a premium because we're all busier than ever, there's more content. Are we going through a time that speaks more to poetry and that poetry is both capable of capturing some of these concerns, but also acknowledging or kind of conceding to the fact that as writers, we don't have the luxury to expect that kind of commitment. Do you have any thoughts on that? Good, bad, indifferent, disagree?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I would be inclined to agree, but the author Lori Moore once said something really powerful that changed my thinking on this in a dramatic way, where so the thing with a novel, and they sell far more than any other form of I mean, nonfiction is a different thing, but in terms of poetry, short stories, and novels, you know, it's not even close. So there's something still there. With a novel, you're not going to finish it right now. You're not going to. So however far you get is fine. And what Lori Moore said is, because someone said to her, because she's mainly known for short stories, although she's written other things as well, isn't this the perfect moment for short stories? Nobody has the attention span. And she said it's actually the worst moment for short stories. Because with a short story, you have to have the exact amount of time the short story takes. If it's a 13-page story and you have time to read 11 pages, it's like a failure experience. You know, if you have time to read 11 pages of a novel, it's fine. You weren't going to finish anyway. You just read those 11 pages and you move on, right? Even worse, you have time for 15 pages, and the short story is 13 pages. And so you finish the story and you're like, now what? You know, do I start another one? Do I, what? You know, it's this weird, and I think it's true of poetry too. And I have personal experience with this where I need to read before I can go to sleep. Just kind of quiet the noise and focus on a thing. And when I'm reading a novel and I hear the sounds in the bathroom of my wife getting ready for bed, it's fine. I'm like, soon she'll be here and we'll go to bed. And when I'm in the middle of a poem and I'm like halfway through and I hear those sounds, I'm like, oh shit, I better read this poem. You know, I don't want to like stop in the middle of it. So it's that, I think Lori Moore, as you know, she sometimes has been, was right about that.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love that it's not only, it's the worst time for sure. I definitely haven't heard that.
Maybe poems too, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, and I think the key takeaway, at least for me, would be, of course, there's no correct answer, nor should there be. The times, you know, and who knows how this work or any of our work will land a year or 5 or hopefully 100 from now. So I think there's that too, which I think is ultimately liberating, right? You just let go of expectation and response. And I also want to acknowledge you spoke to something that was very meaningful, the notion of when you're, whether it's a novel or a poem, you're ultimately trying to satisfy you're scratching your own itch.
Yeah.
That can get very cute very quickly, but I think any serious writer will immediately talk about, if you've done it long enough with enough failure, and I know from what you said, we can certainly speak to that.
So much.
You really don't keep going, or you don't find joy in the process if you're not ultimately satisfying the inner compulsion. Everything else at a certain point is kind of gravy.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned her already, but she's the greatest of all time, so I might as well mention her twice. But Toni Morrison used to talk about when a book didn't exist that she wanted to read, she just wrote it. You know, what a badass, right?
I know. Only she can say that and get away with it.
Kidding me? We were at the portrait gallery yesterday. There's a portrait of her in there, and I'm like, it's just so badass. It's just such a good. Anyway, I'll stop. But yeah, that's sort of about that, scratching that itch.
Yeah.
And I mean, aren't we glad she did? Right? I mean, it's a sort of a, you could call it a selfish act. But I'm always encouraging my students to be as selfish as they possibly can in that way. The good things happen when you honor yourself and start there and work your way out.
I think often, and more often as I get older, the definition of art is creating a problem that only you can solve. And then you recognize it's not that unique, but it's perhaps a unique take on a particular thing, and that's what resonates and leads to connection. I appreciate the shout out you gave me earlier. I want to return the favor. At 1455, we're all about community with a capital C, and what I mean by that is certainly taking every opportunity to celebrate how art brings people together, as opposed to so much of modern life which seems designed to drive division and capitalize on dissension. You are a big advocate for the literary community. So I want to thank you for that. You're an active member, and I'd love you to talk a little bit about, again, speaking for myself, I've found, because of the ceaseless rejection, because of the solitude that is part of the process, being a part of the lifting up other writers and connecting readers and writers, on some levels, is a very selfish act. It's truly joyful, where the creative act, even at its zenith, can be fleeting and short-lived. The notion of connecting and lifting up other writers, dead or alive, there's something so vital about that. But I want to acknowledge that you do this. I'd love you to talk a little bit about what drives you to be, what I would call an active literary citizen.
Oh, thank you for that. It's very important to me. Well, one thing that you know if you're in the writing business is that most days it's not your turn. Most days by far, it's not you who's having the amazing thing happening to you. It's somebody else. And that can be really hard, particularly if you're viewing the world as kind of zero-sum space, because you're losing all the time. That's what that means. And I discovered this thing, and you're totally right to use the word selfish here. I've talked to people who do jujitsu, and they say I'm doing this justice. I don't know 100% if I'm getting this right, but I believe in something I call envy jujitsu. So jujitsu, as I've had it explained to me, is you take the force of what's coming at you and you direct it in a new way. And so the force of what's coming at me is, I'm not succeeding, this other person is succeeding, I hate that. And so I'm feeling agitated, like I want to do something. So what I do is I make sure to post about their success. I just take that energy and put it into lifting them up. And all of a sudden it feels nice and not bad. And it's not zero sum, because then I'm participating in it actually, which is kind of cool. It sort of becomes relevant to me as well. And it just dissipates the feelings. So I do that on social media. I also started doing a thing called Good News Fridays, where I just ask people what their good news is. Friday for me, it's about to be Shabbat, so I'm thinking about good things. And I don't make it a religious thing at all, but I just call it Good News Fridays. And I just discovered there was a period of time where not much was happening for me in my publishing world, but I have all these people I'm connected to on social media who I love. And I'm like, well, why don't we find out what's going on? And of course, it's not just about writers. People are like, that headache that I've been having for weeks has gone away. I'm a great aunt today, whatever it is. All sorts of cool stuff. And I just adore it as a space where it's like people that I like and that I love. Some of them I don't know them well enough maybe to love in a full way because they're just social media friends, but that I like them anyway. Cool things are happening in their life. Great. So I do that. And then the last thing that I like to do is birthdays, which I know you know about, where I reach out to folks ahead of their birthday if they're an artist or a writer and say, what advice do you have, or what wishes do you have to share with the community? And on their day, I'll share it out with everybody. And it's because of the Envy Jiu-Jitsu thing that there's algorithms. You don't always see all the things. And so I'm sure I'm missing things that people are having in their lives that are great. And so now I can get ahead of the ugly force and just put out good things first. And I have enough contacts on social media that it's a little bit of a lift, but I love it. So
yeah, well, I actually want to thank you for the work you do there. And I think we're preaching to our choir, our people here, but that's necessary in day-to-day life, right? Whether it's 2020 or 2023. But I've found in my capacity, my modest capacity at 1455, I think at times artists and writers in particular are the worst at that. I think there's so much self-absorption and so much understandable pressure. Again, thinking about the info overload, like everyone now has to be a marketer, everyone has to be their sales agent, they have to be their own advocate. There is this pressure to always be hustling. And
Please buy one of my books in the back.
right.
Did I mention?
Yeah, do we mention there's books in the back? I think writers can and should do more of what we're talking about. So when I see it, I definitely want to celebrate it. So again, thank you for leading by example.
But you're right that it is selfish. I mean, I wanted to see good news on Fridays because I wasn't feeling enough good news. You know, I wanted to lift people up because it made me feel bad to compete with them. You know, I think we actually can dip into some of the negative feelings we have about some of the things going on and turn them. And it's like this nice thing. And maybe you did it from a bad place, but it doesn't matter if the outcome is positive. So, yeah, that's what I think about around that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of metaphysical stuff going on here, right? We could talk about, we grapple as artists with these issues and try to create answers for the problems, but even when we're doing that at a decent level, there's no guarantee of satisfaction. Doing what we're talking about on a day-to-day basis is at least one guarantee endorphin rush of lifting somebody else up, not making it about you, stepping outside your own ego for a second. There is something just inherently positive and hopefully contagious about that.
Hopefully, anyone can do this, it's not copyrighted.
Right.
I do it on Facebook, which is like ages me immediately, but it's because they actually tell you people's birthdays, you know? But you can do stuff anywhere, I guess. I don't know if you want to create a video for everybody on TikTok. That would take a lot of work. Maybe there's a way. I think TikTok's awesome.
So, any questions or comments? I certainly want to acknowledge people that came out. Yes?
So, when you pick up one of David's books, Miss Portland, I feel like that was just one of your most amazing books. I really liked it. I thought it just made me look at something in a whole nother light. And then the way you bring people up, that was new to me. Like, that is rare and unusual, and so encouraging and inspiring. To be able to, like, you know, graduating from an MFA program, there's like, everybody's trying to rush into this like small room, or we're all competing for the same competitions. And to be able to take time and lift people up and make room for everybody is really a gift that you have shown me and have shown a lot of people. So thank you for that.
Well, I mean, you know why we're friends. We're friends because I was mad at you when I didn't know you. I had entered a manuscript of poetry into a contest, and I hadn't won, and Jamie had won, and they had the nerve at this press to send you the copy of the person that had won. So you're like, God damn it. You're reading this thing in a state of aggravation, and you're like, you look nice, strange man. Actually turns out to be a really good book of poetry. And so then I just said, I don't want to be mad at someone who wrote a book of poetry that's this good. So I just emailed you, and I found your email somewhere, or was it social media? I don't remember. I found you somehow, and I was like, you wrote a great book of poetry. And I felt better. And then it turned out we lived near each other. She could have been any place, right? But we're in the DC area. And so then we started meeting and sharing poems. So there's the proof text of one of the ways that this can be a really good thing. I mean, we're friends because of my pettiness, basically. You know? But it can work out. It could be okay.
The transcendent powers of poetry.
There it is.
Any other questions for our?
Yeah, happy to answer anything.
Yes.
Do you find that there's like a poem that you return to sort of like time and again when you're feeling like you need some writing inspiration, or just to read something that you really love?
Do you mean like by somebody else, presumably?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just obsessively read my own poems. They're so good. I would say it's not as much about individual poems, but it is about particular poets. I mentioned Jane Kenyon and Ross Gay earlier. They're two people who I reliably can return to just be lifted up. And this is another difference between, for me, writing things that are not poetry and writing things that are poetry, is that often, like, I can't sit down and be like, now it's time to clock in and write a poem. Whereas with a novel, you kind of can. You're like, well, where was I? So I'll often start a work period by reading poems, because if you read enough good ones, you want to start playing, you know? And I try to bring in all new people all the time. I recently read a book by Hila Ratsabi, which was great. There's Still Woods. That made me want to play. Terry Cross Davis has a book of poetry that made me want to play. But the two that always get me there are Jamie Kenyon and Ross Gay, who I adore.
Any other thoughts or questions? I mean, clearly we left it all in the field, right? What other questions could be asked?
Impertinent questions? If you have anything that's a little aggressive.
Any cherry blossom haters in the audience?
Right. Why are you talking about those flowers? I'm happy to, anything.
Before you end, will you read one more poem?
One more poem?
Yes, please.
Okay. Do you have a vote? As to which, I mean, not that you cancel out or like that I won't.
I did promise you that I had two, but I think I quoted from one, and I know Saturday morning was one. So I will backhand that ball back into your court and let you. It's only appropriate for the author to choose.
Well played, sir. All right, I'm going to read maybe my second favorite poem in the book. It's called Double Rainbow, and it starts with an epigraph from the book of Genesis. Why not? It's the story with Noah, but not that Noah, biblical Noah. The flood and the rainbow afterwards. It says, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm over that stuff. And the quote is, I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Double rainbow. Yesterday someone robbed me, and today an afternoon of rain brings a double rainbow. Judaism has a blessing for that. Also a prayer for keeping thieves away. We have words for everything, even for when words don't work. The story says it's a promise, this rainbow, no more world-ending floods. If our things are swept away, it's going to be by our hands, and we'll own our losses. But what does the second arc mean? The one with colors reversed that hangs pale alongside? What bargain is that? There are so many ways to destroy a world. What I mean is, may we only lose things. Please, may we all have enough time left. Thanks, everybody.
What's left to us by evening? David, I'll just close by saying thank you again. Thank you all for being here. And it really is a tremendous honor. It's good writing is always its own reward, and something I think we are delighted to find when we discover it. But when you can celebrate good writing in a good person and have the opportunity to do it in person, it's really special. So very meaningful for me, and I thank you for your craft, your commitment, and may we meet again and talk poetry.
Yes, many times.
Yes, indeed. So Potter's House, thank you. Books for sale in the back.
I'll sign them if you. I can put anybody's name if you want.
An offer you can't refuse. Thank you all very much for being here. We'll see you again.